bookshelves of like a lawyer's office in a in a cheap lawyer's TV commercial or
Right,
something.
where they buy them by the foot and whatever.
Yeah, and then we took one or two clumps and retextured them to all have specific readable spines on them, and then I just took those clumps and broke them up and scattered the individual books around in different bookshelves in the house, so that hopefully I think every bookshelf has at least one unique book in it. That might not be true of everything in the library since there's so many bookshelves there, but I guess I should say every or almost every bookcase had at least one unique book in it that never repeated, to kind of split the difference of, okay, they're not all generic, but also we can't afford to make them all unique, and we didn't want to have any repeat in an obvious way. So that was our strategy for trying to not do any of the things that we wanted to not do.
Okay.
Sam's story slash school assignment called The Menstrual Cycle, a novella, is kind of a fan favorite. We've found like a lot of people have enjoyed it a lot, and it's one of those weird things where it wasn't planned. Like it was, I just let's see. I had decided that I wanted Sam to have done like some homework, and I thought sex ed homework would be interesting because it's sex ed is a weird class in high school to be in, and so I Google searched for an actual sex ed assignment, and the assignment.
Hang on, I'm just gonna turn the subtitles on if we can get any. Hmm. Hmm. Yep.
Is a real sex ed assignment that is given
No,
out
no
in
subtitles.
like the
Okay.
Pacific Northwest, like Seattle. I think this is technically from the Seattle School District website that I got this from. So so I found this thing which I didn't come up with, that I was kind of presented with, and I think I had been reading some stuff about like cool female spies in World War II, or like saboteurs, that had been part of like the French Resistance and stuff like that, and so that's why the history book is next to the sex ed assignment. The intended implication being Sam was doing history homework and sex ed homework, and the history unit was on World War II, and so kind of as a fuck you to all of the annoying assumptions implied by the sex ed assignment, she wrote this story about a woman in the war who was more interesting than her menstrual cycle, like that is a person, but while fulfilling the requirements of the thing. And yeah, it ended up being this really kind of strange juxtaposition of concepts that ended up saying a lot about Sam, I think.
Okay, that's just kinda cut off, but that's very interesting to hear about sex education and history at the same time.
This is our old-timey record that we got
Okay, here comes
from
the
archive.org, source
subtitles.
of all good things. It's by Adrian Rollini when he was with apparently the Taproom Gang. The song is entitled "Got a Need for You," in case you can't read it, which you should be able to read it. And the duck I found on the internet. Adrian Rollini I got into him when I was on Bioshock 2 and helping source the soundtrack for that. And I did a lot of listening to 40s big band stuff, and Adrian Rollini was one of the ones that I really liked, and so it was cool to be able to revisit that.
Very interesting.
I feel like one of the best best bits of advice was actually from the Fulbright team before going in to do the first recording. And it was a suggestion that I should watch some episodes of My So-Called Life, which was great because I'd watched them all when when they were actually on. It was one of those favorite shows my sister and I would sit down and watch every week. And so going back and watching them was definitely not a hard chore to have to do. So I basically went through all of the episodes I could find online in a couple of days. So it was a bit of a sudden binge watch of My So-Called Life, but it was great because I think watching My So-Called Life was a nice reminder of what a more natural presentation of a teenager is. So it was really, I don't know that it would have gone as well had I not done that.
Wow. All that does sound interesting. And it's a good thing that if you're gonna be a voice actor, you've got to research it. You've got to research it. Do some research for your roles. And, see what you can do about that.
The doors were actually one of the hardest things in the game to get working correctly, and I know that there's still some bugs existing with the doors, actually. But it's a surprisingly hard problem, which is why most video games just have doors that kind of slide away into nothingness or open in strange ways or don't, let you interact fully with doors. But of course, it's in a house like in Gone Home, a realistic house. It's important that everything be as natural as possible. The one concession we made to video gaminess is that the doors all swing both ways, which never happens in a real house. But it's necessary to prevent the player trapping themselves in some strange state.
Nice, good game. It's a good game development there. Okay.
Here we have Fresh Magazine, which is a synthesis and pastiche of Sassy Magazine, which if you haven't looked at it or if it wasn't, something that you cared about in the early 90s, it was very feminist and, strongly individualist and actually gave good advice. It was actually really good. Anyway, so yeah, this is the type treatment. The super grungy type treatment is totally indicative. That's how it used to be. Oh yeah, and amusingly, of course, our cover model is Rachel, Steve's wife. I had to make her put on this awful light pink lipstick and do the 90s stuff imaginable.
Right in the front of her bangs.
Yes.
Yeah, it seems like. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
Inside of this file folder, you find the first combination code in the game. This code goes to Dad's locked filing cabinet, and it's 0451, which is a bit of a tradition / in-joke amongst. I mean, it's not really an in-joke. It's just an internal reference amongst this lineage of games that hark back to immersive sims that are kind of first-person exploration games that started with Ultima Underworld and System Shock, and 451 was the first key code in System Shock, and then it was also the first key code in System Shock 2 and Deus Ex and BioShock and most recently Dishonored. And yeah, I've personally worked on a couple of games that had 0451 as the first code in them, and we were really adherent to the tenets of the interactive model and kind of the principles of design behind those games when we were designing how Gone Home works, and so to maintain that tradition, we also made it the first code in our game.
And you made it the tattoo on your arm.
I also got a tattoo of 0451 because it is sort of a symbol of this certain philosophy of game design that's important to me. And yeah, this writing, Breaking Canon, is in Emily's handwriting. Emily's handwriting is technically only in the font that exists outside the game. She doesn't actually do the handwriting in any of the characters, but yeah, I had her write 0451 in her very distinctive handwriting, and then I got a tattoo of it and figured I would use that source image as the image that you find on the inside of this folder here.
Okay. Wow, I like that. I shouldn't remember all of that. 0451 being the codes in like Bioshock, Deus Ex, and System Shock, and System Shock 2. I should remember that. We've already been in here. And in Please, whatever you have found, don't tell Mom and Dad. The attic. Chris Remo, ambient music.
Composing the ambient exploration tracks definitely ended up being the weirdest part of creating music for Gone Home. The audio diaries tended to take precedence since they had such clear criteria for completion, so the ambient tracks were the last things I did. I spent so long immersed in the logs, which were very specifically timed, that to suddenly shift gears to creating these lone 5-minute pieces was surprisingly difficult. I remember giving Steve a first stab at the ambient track for part 2 of the game, and I didn't hear anything back about it. When I eventually asked if he had any feedback, he said something like, "Oh yeah, it's great. I just slowed it down by 50% and it totally works," which cracked me up because I definitely didn't have that in mind. But that's one of the great things about collaborative work, so I just went with it. I ended up doing a number of further revisions where I'd alter elements of the original version specifically to affect how the 50% slowed version would sound. It was definitely a new experience for me, writing bits of music and trying to imagine how they would sound after it's been considerably distorted. It got weirder though. The ambient track for part 1 ended up being a backwards version of the slowed down part 2 track. And again, there were elements that sounded good at 50% slow forwards, but not at 50% slow backwards. So again, I went back to the original track and started altering elements so they would sound better at half speed in reverse. I don't know if that's a thing ambient composers end up getting used to, but for me it definitely felt like going down the rabbit hole.
Very interesting. Sorry if I sound like I'm not interested, but it does sound interesting. Oh, and Sinner, there's a
One of
furnace.
the larger assets that we needed for the basement to really give it character and personality was a furnace. And when we were initially thinking of the furnace, Steve had mentioned to me the furnace from Home Alone, which if you grew up in the 90s like I did, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I did a lot of research and looked up stuff that could kind of evoke a similar feeling, and we finally settled upon octopus furnaces, which are like they're thematically and time-wise very appropriate. They're these giant hulking monstrosities with all these arms covered in asbestos. Really perfect, so we ended up modeling one of those and put it in the corner, and I think it turned out okay.
Oh man, this thing.
So 2 things. 1, Mom's Canadian.
Yay!
2, Mom didn't start out Canadian. The reason that Mom is Canadian is because Kate Craig and Emily Carroll are Canadian, and early on in the development of the game, Emily did